Most folks, when they hear a man paid 50 cents for a horse, they laugh before he's even finished the sentence. I did too. I'm not proud of it. I stood in that auction yard with a chaw in my cheek and money in my pocket, and I laughed at a boy who had neither, because he raised his hand for an animal the rest of us had already written off as bone and glue. I want to tell you something before we start, because I think it matters how you go into this. I am 81 years old. I have buried 2 wives, 3 brothers, and more good horses than I can count without my ledger open in front of me. And in all those years, the thing that changed my mind about people, really changed it, down in the bottom where a man keeps his hardest opinions, wasn't a war or a sermon or a flood. It was a half-starved mare with a clouded eye and a boy too poor to feed her, standing in the rain on the road out of Calder's Crossing, going home to nothing. So if you've got a few minutes, stay with me. This story takes its time, the way the real ones do. There's a stretch in the middle where you'll think you know how it ends, and you'll be wrong. There's a moment near the finish that I have never been able to tell out loud without my voice going somewhere on me. I'm not going to dress it up. I'm just going to tell it the way it happened, the way I wrote it down that same year, before I was old enough to understand what I'd seen. They laughed at the poor cowboy's 50-cent horse. They are not laughing now. The gavel hadn't even come down, and already the yard was laughing. I remember the sound of it more than I remember the words, that loose, easy laughter men make when they've decided in advance that something is funny, so they don't have to wait to find out. It rolled across the auction pen at Calder's Crossing like dust off a wagon, and at the center of it stood a mare so thin I could have hung my hat on her hip bone. She was the last lot of the day. That tells you everything if you know auctions. The good stock goes in the morning when the buyers are fresh and the money's still warm in their pockets. By late afternoon, what's left is the lame, the old, the ruined, and the ones nobody can quite explain. This mare was none of those exactly, and somehow all of them. She was maybe 7, maybe 8, hard to say through the starvation. Her coat had been some color once. Now it was the gray-brown of a thing that has stopped trying. Ribs you could play like a washboard. A right eye gone milky blue and blind, fixed on nothing. And she stood in that pen with her head low and her ears slack, not flinching at the laughter, not flinching at anything, like the part of her that could be hurt by men had been used up a long while back. I had my hand on the rail. I'll be honest with you, I'd come for a buckboard team and a couple of wieners, and I'd gotten them, and I was tired and ready for the ride home. I almost didn't watch this last lot at all. "What am I bid?" the auctioneer said, and he didn't even bother to make it a question. "Folks, I'll be straight. Mr. Prout here run out of feed and patience both. She's sound enough to walk. Tanner'll give you $2 for the hide and the rest, so let's not embarrass ourselves under that." Somebody near the chutes called out, "I'll give you a nickel and a kick in the pants, Vern," and the yard laughed again. I want you to understand the man who'd brought her. Dale Prout ran the biggest spread in that valley, 300 head, good water, a white house with a porch you could have held a dance on. He was not a poor man bringing a poor animal to market. He was a rich man getting rid of a mistake. He'd bought the mare cheap a year back on some notion she had racing blood in her, and when she didn't pay out the way he'd dreamed, he'd quit feeding her the way you'd quit watering a flower you decided you never liked. That's the part the laughing men didn't think about. She wasn't born to this pen. She'd been brought to it, by inches, by a man with every reason and resource to do better. Prout leaned on the fence with his thumbs in his vest, and watched her get mocked like a man enjoying a show he'd paid for. $1, the auctioneer tried. Nothing. 6 bits. Nothing. He sighed through his mustache. "Gentlemen, somebody put the poor creature out of the auction at least." 50 cents. It was a small voice. It came from the back near the water trough, and it had to climb over all that laughter to be heard, and when it got heard the laughter changed shape, turned mean. I looked, we all looked. He couldn't have been more than 19. Lean as a fence rail, in a coat 2 seasons past saving and boots that had been resoled with something that wasn't leather. His hat he held in both hands against his chest, not on his head where it belonged but held, the way a man holds a hat at a funeral or in front of someone he's afraid of. He had a face like a question nobody had bothered to answer. I learned his name later. Eli Cobb. Orphaned at 11, raised hand-to-mouth by an uncle who worked him like a mule and then died owing money, leaving the boy nothing but the work and the debt. He hired out for fence mending and branding, and whatever else a body needed 2 more hands for, and he slept in other men's barns, and he had, that afternoon, exactly 53 cents to his name. He spent 50 of it on the worst horse in the county. 50 cents, the auctioneer repeated, and you could hear him not believing it. Son, you sure? She eats more than 50 cents in a week, what she'll eat at all. Yes, sir, Eli said, I'm sure. Prout laughed. That's the thing I've never forgotten, and the thing that turned my own stomach against him before I even knew the rest. The man who'd starved her laughed. Boy's bought himself a coat rack, he said to the men around him, and they all thought that was about the funniest thing said all day. Going once, said the auctioneer, almost gentle now, almost like he wanted somebody to save the boy from himself. Going twice, sold, to the young man for 2 bits and 2 bits more. The gavel cracked. Lord have mercy on you both. And that should have been the end of it. A sad little footnote to a long auction day, the kind of thing you mention at supper and forget by morning. I'd have forgotten it too, except for what happened when he went to collect her. I drifted over. I told myself it was on the way to my wagon, which it wasn't, and I watched Eli Cobb walk into that pen with a length of frayed rope he'd had looped in his belt all day, like he'd come knowing. Like he'd ridden in that morning planning to leave with exactly this. And the mare, who'd let men herd her and shove her and load her without lifting her head, that blind-eyed, used-up mare turned at the sound of his boots and looked at him with the eye she had left. Took 1 step toward him on legs that didn't look like they'd hold a saddle blanket, let alone a man. He stopped, stood real still, and then he did a thing I have turned over in my mind for 60 years. He apologized to her. I was close enough to hear it. He put his hand flat on her neck on the part where the bones came up too sharp under the dull coat, and he said, low, like it was just the 2 of them in the whole world, I'm sorry it took me this long to get to you. Not I'll take care of you. Not you're mine now. He apologized, as if he'd kept her waiting, as if the 50 cents wasn't a purchase but a debt he was finally, shamefully, able to pay. I have bought and sold 1,000 animals. I have never once apologized to one. I stood there at that rail and felt something move in me that I did not have a name for and did not much want. Prout saw it too, and it bothered him, the way a generous act bothers a stingy man. Hey, Cobb, he called out. You water that thing, she might dissolve. You best get her home before she falls in two. More laughter. Eli didn't answer. He looped the rope soft around her neck, not her nose, her neck, like you'd lead a friend, not a beast, and he walked her out of that pen at a pace slow enough to match what she had left, which wasn't much. The clouds had been building all afternoon, and they let go just as he reached the road. Cold rain, the kind that comes in spring and pretends it's still winter. The yard emptied fast, men running for their wagons, and I stood under the auctioneer's awning watching a half-starved mare and a half-starved boy walk out into it, neither of them in any hurry, the rain soaking them both equal. He didn't have a wagon. Of course he didn't. Where would a boy like that get a wagon? He had 15 miles of muddy road and a horse he couldn't ride because riding her would have finished her, so he walked it. He walked beside her the whole way in the rain, holding that rope loose, and I know he walked the whole way because I'm the one who passed him. I'd loaded my team and my wieners and started home, and about 4 miles out the storm got serious, and there in the gray of it I came up on the two of them, boy and mare, plodding. The rain had plastered his hair flat and his coat had gone black with it, and he was shivering. I could see it from the wagon seat, the shiver in his shoulders, but he had his coat off. He'd taken his own coat off in the cold rain and laid it over the mare's back, over those sharp hips and ribs, to keep what little warmth she had from washing away. A boy with one coat, wearing it on his horse. I slowed the team. I'm not a soft man, and I wasn't a soft man then, but I slowed the team and I called out over the rain, "Son, I got room. Tie her on behind and climb up, you'll catch your death." He looked up at me, rain running off his nose, and he said polite, no edge to it, just plain, "Thank you, mister, but she can't keep wagon pace, and I'm not leaving her to walk it alone. She's a 50-cent horse, boy." He looked at me a moment longer, something in his face that I'd see again later when the whole valley wanted to take her from him. "No, sir," he said, "she's mine." And he turned back to the road and kept walking, the coat on the mare, the rain coming down. And I sat there in my dry wagon with my dry coat and my good team and watched them get small behind me. And I want to tell you, friend, I have never in my life felt as poor as I felt right then, sitting on everything I owned. I drove home, I did chores, I ate my supper. And then I did a thing I hadn't done in years. I got out my ledger, the one I keep accounts in, every steer and every dollar, my whole life in columns, and I turned to a clean page in the back, and I didn't write down any number. I wrote down what the boy said. "She's mine." I didn't know yet why I needed to keep it. I just knew I'd seen something the laughing men hadn't, and I didn't want to be the kind of man who forgets it by morning. It would be 2 more years before the rest of the valley understood what I'd half understood that night in the rain. 2 years before Dale Prout would stand in his own yard with his hat in his hands, and offer Eli Cobb more money than that boy had seen in his whole life, and get told no. 2 years before they stopped laughing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the trouble with telling a thing you watch from the start. You know the ending, and you have to keep your hands off it. So let me go back. Let me tell you what happened to a 50-cent mare in the keeping of a boy who had nothing to give her but everything he had. Because that, it turned out, was exactly enough. The first time I went out to look at her, I told myself it was about a fence. Eli and I shared a property line. His uncle's old quarter section ran up against my south pasture, scrub land mostly, not worth much, which is how a dead man's broke nephew came to hold it. I had a stretch of wire down and a legitimate reason to ride over, and if I'm honest, the reason was a fig leaf, and we both knew it. I wanted to see if the mare was still alive. She was. That was the first surprise. It was maybe 6 weeks after the auction, full spring now, and I came over the rise and saw Eli's place, a leaning barn, a soddy he slept in, a garden patch, and out in the small corral he'd patched together from deadfall and prayer, there she stood. I almost didn't know her. She was still thin. You don't put weight on a starved horse in 6 weeks, not real weight. The body's too busy fixing what's broke inside to bother with the outside. But she was clean. Somebody had curried the dead coat off her, and what came up underneath was a deep liver chestnut, dark as wet bark, and where the sun hit it there was the ghost of a shine. Her head was up. Both ears worked, swinging toward me as I rode in, even the side with the blind eye. And she'd quit standing the way she'd stood in that pen, that giving up slouch. She stood square, watchful. Eli came out of the barn with a pitchfork and stopped when he saw me, wary the way poor folks get wary of a neighbor with money. And I held up a hand and said something about the fence, and he nodded, and we walked the line together and fixed the wire, and the whole time I kept stealing looks at that corral. "You got her eating," I said finally. Took a while. He wound wire as he talked, not looking at me the way a shy man talks. First 2 weeks she wouldn't hardly. Prout had her on the edge so long her gut had near forgot the job. I started her on warm mash just a little 4 or 5 times a day. Sat with her while she ate so she'd know nobody was going to take it. He paused. She'd watch me the whole time, like she was waiting for the trick. "Horses don't think like that," I said, because that's what we all said back then. "This one does," he said, and he said it so plain, so without argument, that I let it go. "Here is the thing I have to make you understand, because the whole rest of it turns on this, and it isn't about money yet, not at all. What Eli Cobb did for that mare in those first months wasn't training and it wasn't doctoring, though he did both. It was attention. The kind of attention a person mostly only gets from their mother, if they're lucky, and most of us stop getting it the day we're old enough to be useful. He gave a used-up animal his complete and undivided attention, every day with nothing in it for him. Because understand, he could not yet ride her, could not work her, could not sell her, could not breed her, could get not 1 cent of use from her, and he gave it anyway, 50 cents and his only coat and his warm mash and his evenings, into a thing the whole county had told him was worthless. I have thought a great deal in my long life about why people do that. I have decided it is the truest thing a person can do and the rarest, and that you can know everything important about somebody by whether they're capable of it. Now the mare. I said there were surprises, and the first was that she lived. The second came in July. I was riding my South Line again. By then I'll admit I'd started finding reasons, and I came up over the rise at a lope, and down in Eli's scrub pasture I saw the mare running. Not trotting, not loping. Running, flat out, alone, for no reason but the having of legs to do it with, along the bottom fence and up the far side, and friend, I hauled my own horse to a stop and just watched, because I had not seen anything move like that in 30 years of looking at horses. She didn't run like a ranch horse. She ran like the ground had personally offended her and she meant to leave it behind. Low and reaching, that dark body flattening out, mane like smoke. The blind eye didn't slow her. She'd learned to lean her good side to the fence and trust it, and she poured down that line so fast and so smooth she didn't look like she was trying. That's the tell with the great ones. The good ones look like they're working. The great ones look like they're being carried by something the rest of us can't see. Eli was sitting on the fence watching her, and I rode down and reined up next to him, and neither of us said anything for a while. We just watched her run. "Prute bought her for racing blood," Eli said at last, "then quit on her when she was too sick to show it." He was quiet. "She's not too sick now." "No," I said, my mouth had gone a little dry. "No, she surely isn't." That was the moment, if you want to mark one. That was the moment a 50-cent coat rack became something else. But I want to be careful here, because this is where a lazy telling of it would speed up and rush you to the good part, the money part, and that's not how it went, and it's not the part that matters. What mattered was the year that came after, and how hard it was, and the choice it forced. Because finding out your worthless horse can run is not the same as getting rich off it. Not even close. A fast horse is just a fast horse to a man who can't afford an entry fee, can't afford the feed to bring her to racing weight, can't afford to lose a day's wages traveling to a meet. Eli's situation hadn't changed. The mare had changed. The boy was still poor as church mice in a drought. And that winter it got worse. The work dried up the way it does in cold months. Nobody's branding, nobody's fencing, and Eli's little hoard of coins ran out. And then his food ran low. And then the only thing left of any value on that whole quarter section was a dark chestnut mare who could outrun the wind and couldn't earn a dime doing it. And word had gotten around. It always does. A man named Halsey, who ran horses at the county tracks and the territorial meets, rode out to Eli's place in December with a fat purse and a thin smile, having heard about the freak-fast mare on the cob scrub. I know what he offered because I was there. I'd taken to coming by with a sack of feed now and then, calling it neighborly, and I happened to be there mucking the linta when Halsey rode in. He offered $300. I want you to sit with that number the way Eli had to. $300 to a boy who'd had 53 cents at the auction and not much more since. $300 was a start in life. It was a real string of horses. It was a winter of food and a spring of seed and a roof that didn't leak and a future. It was everything, held out in a stranger's hand, for the price of a horse he'd paid 50 cents for and could sell at a profit of roughly 60,000%. Any sane man takes it. Every sane man I have ever known takes it and thanks God for the luck. I'd have taken it. I damn near told him to take it. And here is the morally heavy thing, the choice I promised you, And I'm going to tell it true even though the true version doesn't make Eli look simple or saintly, because he wasn't either one. He almost said yes. That's the part nobody tells when they tell this story now, all dressed up. He didn't refuse with his chin up and a noble speech. He stood there in the cold with his stomach empty and his coffee gone and his winter looking like a long dark hole, and he almost said yes, and I watched him almost say it, and I'll tell you I was glad, because I wanted the boy to have something for once. Halsey could feel it tipping his way. "Smart money's in your hands, son," he said. "She's fast, sure, but fast breaks down. One bad step on that blind side and she's worth $2 to the tanner, same as the day Prout sold her. Take the bird in the hand." And it was that, the same as the day Prout sold her, that did it. I saw it land on Eli's face. Halsey, trying to close the deal, had said the one thing that couldn't be said. He'd lined himself up with Prout. He'd told the boy, without meaning to, that the smart thing, the sane thing, the grown-up thing, was to do to her exactly what Prout had done. Weigh her in dollars, find her wanting, and pass her along down the road to wherever used-up things go. Eli looked over at the corral. The mare was watching us, the way she always watched him, with the one good eye. "No," he said, quiet, almost like an apology again. "Thank you, mister, but she waited a long time for somebody not to do that to her. I'm not going to be the next one." Halsey's smile went flat. He told Eli he was a fool, which we'd all said before, and he told him 300 wouldn't be on the table come spring, which turned out to be the funniest wrong thing anybody ever said in that valley. Then he rode off, and Eli stood there in the cold, having just turned down everything he needed to keep on living, and his hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. I came over and stood by him. I didn't say anything for a bit. Then I said, "You know that was $300. "Yes, sir." "You know you've got no food for January." "Yes, sir," his jaw worked. "I know it." I looked at that mare, and I looked at that boy, and something I'd been holding back since the rain on the auction road finally gave way in me. "Well," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant, "then it's a good thing I overbought feed this year. Got a whole loft going to waste. You'd be doing me a favor hauling some off my hands." He turned and looked at me. He knew it was a lie. I knew he knew. There's a kind of charity that has to be dressed up as a favor or a proud man can't take it, and we both stood in that knowledge a moment. "I can't pay you," he said. "Didn't ask you to. I won't take it for nothing." I thought about it. "Then when that mare wins something," I said, "you can pay me back out of the purse." He almost smiled, first time I'd seen it. "When she wins," he repeated, like he was testing the weight of it. "Not if." I'd said when without thinking, and he caught it and held it. "When," I said. We didn't know yet that when was closer than either of us dreamed. We didn't know that the following April, at the spring meet in Calder's Crossing, the same town, the same yard practically, a dark chestnut mare with a blind eye and a boy in a borrowed coat would line up against Dale Prout's Pride and the territory's best, with no business being there, and that what happened next would be talked about in that valley for 40 years. But that's the next part, and I've learned telling this that you've got to let the cold winter sit a minute before you let the spring come. Otherwise you don't feel what it cost, and it cost. Lord, it cost. The mare had a name by then, by the way. I never said. He'd called her 4 bits, 50 cents. He'd taken the cruelest joke the auction yard had thrown at her. Boy paid 50 cents for that, and he'd hung it on her like a medal, so that every time he said her name, every single time he was saying, "Yes, 50 cents, and worth more than all of you." He just hadn't proved it yet. The spring meet at Calder's Crossing wasn't a real race. I want to say that plain because the way people tell it now you'd think there were grandstands and a brass band. There weren't. It was a measured mile down the river road, marked off with 2 posted flags, the way ranchmen have settled, whose horse is faster, since there have been ranchmen and horses. There was a purse because the men with money liked there to be a purse, $40 a head to enter, winner takes the pot. 6 entered that year. 5 of them were rich men's horses. The 6th was 4 bits. Eli couldn't have made the $40 entry in 100 years. I paid it. I told myself it was a wager, an investment, and maybe it half was, but mostly I paid it because I had reached an age, even then, where I had started to understand that there are only a few times in a life you get to stand close to something true, and a man's a fool to count the cost when one comes around. Prout had a horse in it. Of course he did. A tall gray stallion, 3 years old, papered that he'd paid a frightening sum for back east and shipped out at greater expense, and that he talked about the way some men talk about their sons. He'd entered the gray to win, naturally, but I always thought, he'd entered it as much to put the boy in his place. Word had reached him that the freak mare he'd dumped for 2 bits was the same one a fool kid had nursed up and was fixing to run. It must have eaten at him. A starved-out mistake of his, come back dressed up, daring to line up against his thoroughbred. He couldn't let that pass. Rich men can forgive almost anything except being made to look foolish by someone they've decided is beneath them. The morning of the race, the river road was lined 3 deep with most of the county. People had come to see the rich men's horses run and to laugh one more time at the 50-cent mare. I heard them. That's her, that bag of bones. Because she was still light, still showed her ribs if she turned a certain way, never did carry flesh like a pampered horse. Cobb's gone and entered the glue pot. And the laughing started up again, the same loose, easy laughing from the auction, like no time had passed at all. Eli didn't hear it or didn't let himself. He stood at 4 bits' head with his forehead against her cheek on the blind side, and he was talking to her low, the way he'd talked to her in the pen that first day. I came close enough to catch a few words. He wasn't telling her to win. I want you to know that. He was saying, you don't owe me a thing. Whatever happens out there, you come back to me and we go home. That's all. That's the only part that matters. Then he straightened up, and his face did something, and I followed his eyes, and there was Prout, leading the gray up to the line, looking down the row of horses until he found the mare, and when he found her he smiled. It was the same smile from the auction, the exact one. Boys bought himself a coat rack. I have wondered over the years whether 4 bits remembered him. People will tell you a horse can't hold a grudge a year and a half, can't connect a fat man at a starting line to the man who'd watched her starve. Maybe they're right. But I was there, and I'll tell you what I saw. When Prout's gray came up alongside her at the line, that mare, who stood quiet for everything, who'd let men shove her and load her without a flicker, laid her ears flat back against her skull and showed the whole white of her one good eye. She knew him. I don't care what anyone says, she knew him. They lined the 6 across. No gates, just a man with a pistol and a dropped flag. The road ran straight for that measured mile, river on the left, the crowd thinning down the length of it, the 2 posted flags shimmering at the far end in the morning heat. I have started maybe 1,000 races in my mind since that day, slowing it down, trying to hold it. It went like this. The pistol cracked, and 5 horses leapt and 1 did not. 4 bits broke a half stride slow, the blind eye, I think. She lost the flag drop on that side and had to catch it late, and that half stride was all the laughing crowd needed. A roar of it went up. The gray and a tall bay shot to the front, and the mare was last, dead last, 3 lengths back before they'd gone 50 yards, and I heard a man near me say, satisfied, "There it is. There's your 50-cent horse," and I wanted to put him through the fence. Then she started to move. I have told this part badly all my life because there are no words built for it. She didn't surge. A surge is a thing you see. This was, she found another gear that the others didn't have and had never had, and she dropped into it, low and flat and reaching, that smoke mane streaming, and she began to come through the field not like a horse passing horses, but like a different kind of animal entirely, like the rest of them were standing in a river, and she was the river. 4th at the quarter, the crowd had gone quiet on her side. 2nd at the half, the river road flashing under her, the boy on her back folded down low and still, asking her nothing, just staying out of her way, trusting her the way she'd learned to trust the fence on her blind side. And then it was just her and the gray. Prout's stallion was a good horse. I'll grant it that to my grave. He ran his heart out down that last quarter mile, papered and pampered and bred for exactly this. And for a few strides they were neck and neck, and the whole county was screaming, and the dust was up and I could not see, and then I could, and the mare's nose was in front. A length, too. She didn't beat the gray. She left him, the way she'd left the empty pasture all those months, running for the pure animal joy of being a thing that could finally run. And she crossed between the two flags so far ahead that the man posted there forgot to drop his arm, just stood there with his mouth open, watching a 50-cent mare run into the rest of her life. I looked for Eli at the finish and couldn't find him for a second, and then I did, and he pulled her up and slid down off her back, and he had his face buried in her neck, both arms around her, and his shoulders were going. And I want to tell you that grown men do not generally cry at horse races, but I looked around and there was more than one wet face on that road, mine among them, and not a one of us laughing now. I never said how much was in that purse. $240, 6 entries at 40. Eli paid me back my entry fee and my winter's feed out of it on the spot, pressed the coins into my hand and wouldn't hear no, and I let him, because I'd learned by then that letting a proud man pay his debts is its own kind of kindness. But the purse wasn't the riches. The purse was nothing. The riches came after, and they came the way real fortune comes, slow and then all at once. Because a man named Cowboy had been at that race, a serious horseman from down in the territory capital, the kind of man who knew bloodlines the way a preacher knows scripture, and he'd watched that mare run and gone pale, and he'd done some asking, and it turned out the racing blood Prout had gambled on and given up on was real, was deep, was the kind of blood that throws champions. Prout had been right about her. He just quit a year before being right paid out. Quit her right at the bottom, the way a man does when he's measuring everything in dollars and can't see anything else. She couldn't be raced much longer. You don't run a mare hard on a blind eye for years, and Eli wouldn't have if you paid him. But as a brood mare, bred to the right studs, throwing foals with that engine and that heart friend, that was a fortune that paid out for 20 years. Her first foal sold for more than Prout's whole gray had cost. Her third went east to people whose names you'd know. Eli Cobb, who'd had 53 cents and a borrowed barn, built a real ranch on that bloodline, married a Callaway girl, raised children who never once went to bed hungry, and he did it all out of a horse the whole county had laughed at, and a rich man had thrown away for 2 bits. She made him rich. The title's not a lie. She made him rich in dollars, more than he ever spent in his life. But that's not why I've kept this story in the back of my ledger for 60 years, and it's not why I'm telling it to you now, when I'm old and most everyone who laughed is dead. I'm telling it because of one more thing, and then I'll let you go. Prout came out to Eli's place, maybe 3 years on, after the bloodline had made its name and his own gray had faded into just another good-enough horse. He came in a fine buggy and he sat in Eli's yard, a real house now, a porch, and he held his hat in his hands, his own hat in his own hands, the way Eli had held his that day at the auction, and he offered to buy 4 bits back. Offered a sum I won't even tell you, it was so large. He didn't apologize. Men like that never quite manage the apology, but the hat in the hands was as close as he had. And Eli, who could have lorded it, who'd earned the right to laugh in that man's face, Eli just shook his head slow and said no. Prout pushed, named a bigger number, and Eli looked out at the corral where an old dark chestnut mare with a clouded eye stood square in the late sun, gone gray around the muzzle now, watching him the way she'd watched him from the first, and he said the only thing he ever needed to say to that man, the same thing the boy in the rain had said to me on the auction road, all those years before. No, sir, a long pause, she's mine. I was there for that, too. I'd grown old enough by then to make sure I was there for the things that mattered. Prout left. The dust settled, and Eli walked out to the corral and put his hand flat on her neck, on the spot where the bones used to come up too sharp and didn't anymore, and he leaned his forehead against her blind side, and the two of them stood there in the gold light not needing anything from anybody. And I closed my ledger and got on my horse and rode home, and I did not look back, because some things you only get to see right if you don't. She lived to be 26. He was with her at the end. He buried her up on the rise that looks down over the ranch she built, and they say I wasn't there for that part. I was too old and it would have broke me. They say he stood at that grave a long while, and that what he finally said before he walked back down the hill wasn't goodbye.